An identity crisis can be many things. Losing your sense of purpose, a midlife crisis, returning to civilian life, or simply feeling like you don't belong. My life has been one ongoing identity crisis after another. I've started this podcast to help deal with my own demons and negative self-talk, and to ultimately and hopefully learn that I'm not alone, and that these thoughts and feelings aren't unique to me. So if this helps you too, then one by one we can come together, heal ourselves, and move forward with our goals and dreams with a sense of belief, happiness, and purpose. Hi, welcome back to the Identity Crisis Podcast. I'm JNewtz, and my guest today is modeler, broadcaster, and everything in between, Jenny Kirk. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me on.
No, thank you very, very much. Now, of course, I know you through the same world as far as model railways, modelling in general. I've also seen you prior to that for quite some time online, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who probably have a similar hobby who may have heard of you or seen you as well. But I guess let's quickly talk about how did you get into doing what you're doing? Because there's a lot of people obviously who'd like to make videos on YouTube or thereabouts. But what was it that made you start doing that?
I do get asked this a lot, and if there is a magic formula, nobody let me in on it. I kind of just fell into it. Originally, my background going way back is broadcasting and journalism. And the YouTube side of things was quite simply my partner wanted to get into making YouTube videos. And they used me as an excuse to get footage that they could then practice editing with.
Oh, right.
And I just fell down this little rabbit hole of railway modelling, which always was a hobby of mine. But I never set out thinking, right, I'm going to be a big YouTuber in the world of model railways. It just kind of organically happened.
It's interesting. A lot of people who have got success in certain areas of their life, it's usually they tell a very similar story. Like people just go, it just kind of happened. I mean, sometimes they have an idea or a goal, but other times it literally just does happen. But one of the things that you mentioned there, which I always find fascinating because I've come from a broadcast background myself. You mentioned that you used to do what was journalism. So how did you get into that, and what was life like that for you?
I mean, if we go way back, the very start of it all was student radio, which I guess a lot of people, certainly from my generation and before, would get into journalism and broadcasting through student newspapers, student radio. And that was kind of my way in. And then through that, I went into local radio. And I ended up being mentored by a terrific guy. His name's Chris Yates. And he was quite a famous journalist. He specialized in aviation security and terrorism. So every time somebody crashed a plane or blew a plane up or hijacked it, he was the expert who got wheeled out. And I ended up, we kind of just hit it off. We had a very similar sense of humor. So I gravitated into being a researcher for him straight out of university. We kept in touch whilst I was at university. And at the end of it all, he offered me a job. And I found myself fresh from university, rushing around different studios and such like, and following some really quite intense stories. So things like 9/11 was obviously a huge thing, but also the crashing of Air France Concorde, and there was the Coda Air case is another one that I remember quite well, where somebody decided that they would try and smuggle guns on an old Boeing 707, and there was a huge, great big court case surrounding that as well. And it was very, very interesting, and it's not what you would consider a conventional job. And that was how it happened. And if somebody came to me and said, "So, what do I need to do this for a living?" Quite honestly, lots of luck, chance encounters, and being in the right place at the right time is probably the best way of describing it.
I was going to say, it sounds like you almost fell into that as well.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I was a very late starter when it came to music. I guess I was in sixth form when I developed an interest in music, which is probably quite late starting. And I still remember to this day that I walked into a record shop, and for some reason, this was at the point when vinyl records had pretty much died out. And they actually had vinyl records of music that was in the charts. And I was just struck by the beauty of a copy of Oasis's "Definitely Maybe."
Oh, I love that album so much.
Yeah, so there was just, when something just grabs you, you're going to buy that. And I remember buying that LP, double LP, and I fell in love with the whole aesthetic of vinyl records of music. And that became my number one hobby through sixth form, was everything to do with music. A friend of mine started up a radio station at the sixth form college, which essentially he just drilled holes in the floor and ran very, very long cables from an amplifier to speakers around the common room, and probably didn't get permission to do that. We ended up, it was just like there was three of us, and we just lark around in this kind of like a broom cupboard, playing records and trying to be funny, and probably failing miserably in that in the way that every 17-year-old thinks that they're the funniest thing ever, and actually we probably weren't. And that's really where the bug started. And I met Chris Yates because the guy who'd kind of started, who was the driving force behind the student radio, he'd approached a local radio station to, doing the big "I am, look at me, I've started this radio station." And he was bragging about this, and I said, it sounds really interesting. Could I get a copy of that number? And I wrote down this telephone number he'd been given to make contact, and I was the one who made contact, and ended up getting invited down to the radio station, and just hit it off with the guy who was he was doing like the overnight stuff. So he'd do 2 a.m. through till 6 a.m. in the morning. And I learnt my craft just by hanging out with him. And he was the guy who also did the aviation journalism. And that's kind of how it started.
Do you know, it sounds to me, and I know I actually throw myself into this analogy as well rather than just you, but it definitely sounds, because everything's kind of happened, I think that the album "Definitely Maybe" and the title "Definitely Maybe" kind of sums up a lot of what you've gone through in your life. Definitely maybe, definitely maybe, and I can draw that to my life straight away. I mean, as I said, I used to work in television broadcast and professional video as well, and I fell into that through people that my dad knew, and definitely maybe it just kept going on, and then that went into acting and stand-up comedy, and even what I do outside of that now as a living. And of course, you know me through the model railway world as well. Once again, definitely maybe. It's that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of my philosophies going way, way back was always take a chance, and then you won't be sorry for what might have been. And I guess I've seen so many people over the years who'll say, I've got this great idea, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it's almost like they let the fear of failing stop them from trying. And I always took a view that, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I always grabbed chances when they came along. And even if it ended up with me falling flat on my face, at least then I wouldn't kind of wistfully think, that could have been massive. So, I've done loads of things through my life, which I'm guessing, looking back to me, it's just like, there's this stuff we just laughed about, things happened. But from the outside, people would look in and go, man, that's amazing. I've worked with some amazing people. I've dabbled in a lot of film, television, and for a while, I was developing program ideas for a production company down in London. And, it was quite surreal because, you kind of fall into these things because you're in the right place at the right time, you meet the right people. And when they say, you're interesting, are you interested in doing this? You just say yes. It's like this almost this Tourette's response. Go, yes. And then you think about later, like, how the hell am I going to do this? So I've ended up doing television, both in front and behind the camera. I've ended up working on films as well through, again, very convoluted means. I ended up working for a company that does the lighting for film and television, and I ended up working on the logistics side of that. And you'd end up stood on the set of all sorts of incredible things. So one of the more recent ones, How to Train Your Dragon, the live action film. And I remember just being stood on the set thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Doctor Who was another one. I know a lot of, I hear it's quite popular. But, actually being on the TARDIS set of Doctor Who just before it was all moved from BBC Cardiff to Badwell Studios. And being in there in the control room of the TARDIS and thinking, what the hell am I doing here? It's almost like you kind of. I always feel like an imposter. Although it was said to me that real imposters don't feel like an imposter because they know that they're not supposed to be there. I did Broadchurch. Was one of the really memorable things I can remember being involved. And when I say involved, I'm very much on the periphery. It's not like I'm a main mover and shaker. I move lights from A to B so that people who actually know how they work can work their magic. It's an interesting story, actually. I do occasionally trot this out, but I also used to write books as well. So I lose count. It's something like 14 times published author.
Oh, wow.
And
nice.
I used to do book signing tours before the Amazon Kindle ruined all that and made it so people just don't buy physical books. I used to go on book signing tours. We'd go around all the Waterstones in the UK and just sign books on a Saturday morning. And at one of these events, I actually met Lenny Henry because, as it turned out, he was doing a stand-up gig in the town that evening. So, he just sort of went walkabout. And when you meet Lenny Henry, he's when he's not being the Lenny Henry that everybody recognizes on TV, he's actually a very serious guy. And he was just going around and he came up to the table and he started chatting with me about the creative process, how I found putting together the books, where I got my inspiration from. And we were chatting away, and the back of my brain's going, you know this person. You recognize them from somewhere. And I couldn't quite place him. So we're chatting away, and I was aware of people flitting around in the periphery, really excited. So my brain's going, this person's famous. You'll place them later, but right now, just be polite, smile and wave, and everything will be fine. So I chatted with him for ages, and then he went off. And then the manager for the Waterstones came up to me and went, do you know who that was? I was like, I couldn't place him. He said, it's Lenny Henry. And then months and months later, I was on the set of Broadchurch down at Bristol Bottle Yard Studios, and they were doing a read-through, and he was there. And he sort of double took, and he just pointed at me, and he went, he said, "Oh, you're the book lady. How did that go?" And I had this surreal situation where I'm very mindful that there's a lot of very famous people hanging around, and Lenny Henry's talking to me, and they're all looking. Oh, should we know this person?
It's interesting. I mean, I think the thing that probably made you memorable is the fact that you didn't have that response of oh my god, it's Lenny Henry, because a lot of those celebrities, whether they be actors, comedians, filmmakers, writers, whatever it might be, a lot of them all the time get barraged with with fans. I've had a few experiences like that myself. I went to see Jimmy Carr the very first time he was in Melbourne, Australia. I went to see him, and the person directly in front of me was Jeffrey Rush. And of course, by that stage, Jeffrey Rush had been in some incredible films. Obviously, Pirates was relatively recent at that stage, one of my favorite movies. And everyone was just, oh, Mr. Rush, can I get a picture? Oh, Mr. Rush, Mr. Rush. And when it came to the interval, as we were all walking out for the interval, it turned out that we literally met each other in the stairwell. And I just said, oh, look, please, after you. And then he went before me. And as we got closer to the door, it became two lines, and we were literally standing next to each other after a while. And I'd seen a video of his, about, I think, 6 months prior, where he was talking about basically trailblazing your own path. And I just simply said to him, I said, oh, by the way, I said, I saw an interview with you and you mentioned this thing about, blazing your own path. And I found that really inspirational. And I didn't labor on it, but he looked at me and he said, oh, thanks very much. And you could just tell in the way he looked at me and his response, you could just tell that a conversation like that, a normal-ish conversation, was something that he never really got out in public. It was always like, oh, what was it like to work on this movie? And, oh, what's Johnny Depp like? And, oh, what's and I think people forget that, these celebrities, no matter what walk of life they work in, they are just, human beings as well, away from their celebrity persona.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about that. I mean, it reminds me, again, when I was working with Chris, as journalists, you spend a lot of time in pubs. It's just one of those things.
A likely story. You just love hanging around pubs.
No, the guy I worked for did. But one of the pubs we used to go to was just around the corner from where he lived. And it just happened to be the local pub where Nat Lofthouse went to drink.
Oh, right.
And the famous footballer, Lion of Vienna, played for Bolton Wanderers. And I have zero interest in football. It just passes me by. I hear it's popular. And I ended up sat talking to Nat Lofthouse from time to time. And we got on really well. And because I think it was because I had no interest in football. So we just chat about boring, mundane, everyday things.
A normal conversation that he could just disengage from and just enjoy away from his current reality.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was suddenly being treated like an ordinary person, which I guess anybody the further up the food chain of fame you go, the harder it is to just have ordinary conversations. That aren't all about, oh, we love you, we love what you did with this is great, that is great. And it must get incredibly difficult where every conversation is about, the same 6 things being asked over and over again. And it's like, all you want to do is talk to somebody about the weather. I remember meeting Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, and he wouldn't shut up about the weather, about the traffic warden who'd put a ticket on his van. And it's like, so I'm sat here, I'm hanging out with Bruce Dickinson, and we're just having a normal, everyday conversation. And it was really surreal because you're just looking at this guy that you've kind of idolized growing up. And it's like, my God, this is incredible. But, all he wanted to do was talk about the weather and how evil traffic wardens were for putting a ticket on his car.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think that also, people like you and me who also work and have worked and still do work in creative fields, I think that we've naturally got, we're disengaged from the idea of celebrities. We see them as, well, they're just people because, they work in the same industry. We don't do the same thing, but we work in the same industry, and the industry runs on people. It's just some people everyone knows because you're the person that we listen to or watch in the spotlight. And then there's other people who no one will ever physically know, but they're just as vital to that other person's role. And I think when you work in an industry that's surrounded by those sort of people all the time, you do become very disengaged from the idea of celebrities, and you do see people as as real people. But I tell you, moving on, because we could talk about that for such a long time.
Yeah.
And the result will just always be the same. As I said before, it sounds like you've had a varied variety of activities in your life as far as career and goals and everything in between. But it hasn't all been smooth sailing for you, has it?
No, and I think it's depression and difficulties surrounding sexuality and such like is something that's always been there with me. I have a lot of autistic traits as well. And, going right back into childhood, autism wasn't a thing when I was growing up. I guess that there were people who were very autistic that very much stood out, but then there was a lot of other people who'd have various autistic traits, and you'd either be pigeonholed as incredibly intelligent or disruptive and such like. And I found it very difficult to have relationships with people on a fundamental level. I found it very difficult to relate to people, to kind of understand what people were thinking, to read body language. And at the time, there was no diagnosis. I could function in the world, but it meant that I got bullied a lot. I suppose I was a very easy target because I used to hyperfixate on things. If there was something that I had an interest in, I would make it my mission in life to learn everything about it. So I became like a sponge for information. But unfortunately, that came with difficulties of being bullied. I could count a number of friends I had on the fingers of one hand and still had fingers left over. With that comes depression, feelings of loneliness. And I grew up in an age before the internet. I mean, I'm a child of the 1970s just. I was born in 1979. So it wasn't like now where you could just go and Google it. It's like, why am I like this? And Dr. Google spits out all the stuff. And you're like, oh, right, okay, that makes things make much more sense. That wasn't a thing. So I always felt like there was something wrong with me because I didn't know anybody else like me. And I almost felt growing up like the way I felt about things was wrong, was somehow dirty, and there was something fundamentally wrong about me that I needed to keep hidden. And I guess there's a lot of people who certainly grew up in a pre-internet age, and maybe even now as well, but definitely pre-internet, would probably say the same, that because you didn't know of anybody else, in your head, you're like, well, everybody else looks happy on the outside.
Or normal.
But, yeah, it's like they all look normal. So clearly there's something wrong with me. And you couldn't just go and look things up. And for me, the biggest revelation was actually, it was in the 1990s, there was a program on Channel 4 here in the UK called John to Julia, something like that. And that was the revelation for me. Watching that with the volume turned right down so nobody else could hear us watching it. My finger on the channel change button in case anybody walked in. And so I knew that there was something respectable on ITV, and I could just flip that button and go, oh, no, what are you doing? No, nothing. And for me, it was the revelation. That was the first time I knew there were people like me.
Yeah.
And that was, in some respects, an incredible moment in my life. That it's like, I'm not alone. I'm not, there's not something wrong with me, and there are other people like me. But then, of course, you're faced with, again, it's a pre-internet age. Well, what the hell do I do about this? Where do I get information about this? What do I do about this? How do I fix the problem? And that then brings with it its own set of difficulties, because then it's like, right, okay, I know what I need to do, I just don't know how to do it. And then that brings different depression with it. Essentially, when I went to university, I guess it was a moment where I was away from my parents for the first time, and suddenly I could try and be myself. Now, again, this is sort of late 1990s. The internet existed. I remember finding that at university, but it was not like how you would see the internet now. Google didn't exist. Everybody talks about, oh, we'll just Google that. No, there was no Google. I think there was about 30 or 40 different search engines. None of them was particularly good at finding what you wanted.
No, they were. I remember the very early days of the internet as well, and it was Yahoo or MSN, for example, and even then you use that as a basis, and then just jumped onto a website from there, or the old chat sites where you'd talk to people online through what we now would call Messenger, but you do it physically sat at your computer rather than on your phone.
Yeah, I mean, everybody does everything on a phone now. Back then, mobile phones existed. They were big. They were expensive. And they weren't smartphones. I think text messages existed. They weren't a big thing. But heaven forbid, people used a phone for making phone calls, and that's what they were for. So if you wanted the internet, you needed a desktop PC, and you needed a physical cable out the back that plugged either to the phone line, or if you were lucky, you had a connection to a network, a LAN, something like that. And speeds weren't great. I mean, I can remember how slow everything appeared to be, but you accepted it. That's just how it was. But there was no Amazon. I remember eBay turning up, and that being a novelty. In fact, I remember Amazon turning up, and they started out selling books. And apparently, this was because the idea of sight unseen internet mail order was such a new thing. Nobody was quite sure how it would work, and they figured that everybody knows what a book is. You don't have to see a book to know whether you want it or not. So it's a fairly safe commodity to start your internet mail order, because you can list all these books, and people know, I want the latest Len Deaton book. That they buy the Len Deaton book with the right title, and that's what actually arrives. So Amazon started out with that, and I think music as well. And there used to be lots of different retailers that specialized in different things. I remember Jungle.com for computer parts, DVD Plus for DVDs. They were a very new thing. But in terms of actually finding information, I remember it being very difficult. You used to have to use 3 or 4 different search engines, and you were never quite certain that you found the right thing. A lot of information just wasn't on the internet. There was no Wikipedia. A lot of it was people's own personal websites that they'd created on GeoCities, so they were all bright, garish colors and garbage, basically. So finding information was really, really hard, and there was still a lot of prejudice. I can remember being chased by people with knives, who you knew full well that if they caught up to you, they weren't going to be friendly. There were some very bad experiences.
It's a real shame, because I hear stories like that, and I've heard other people mention stories like that, and you think, wow, what a horrible world it was, with so much judgment. But then on the flip side, these days, even though we are living in like the information superhighway, technologies all around us, we've got fast internet, you can search anything literally within seconds going through a search engine like Google. You would think that people would have become more accepting, more understanding. But the unfortunate thing is, and this is what I've noticed, is on the surface level, they go, oh, yeah, well, we're very accepting and very open-minded and whatever the case may be. But people are still assholes. There's still a whole bunch, for every person out there who is accepting or understanding of somebody who's dyslexic or autistic or their sexuality or any way they want to portray themselves in life, there are still 10 people behind going, well, fuck you, I don't like that.
Yeah, I think the way the internet's developed, and we hear a lot about the algorithm, like it's this sort of the all-seeing eye of the algorithm. But it's it feels like on social media in particular that there's almost like this Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole that people end up, without even realizing it, I guess, going down this rabbit hole where they're all pushed together, the people who have certain opinions, who post and share certain things, and it becomes like a big echo chamber. So it's not like how I mean, I remember the internet being this almost like this huge Wizard of Oz wonderful revelation in probably about 2005. And it was very accepting. You could find other people who were like you. And there's a lot of tolerance. And then social media turns up. And that's when you get this kind of echo chamber effect where all of the people with who are shouting about, kill the faggots and all this sort of thing, they all get pushed together, and there's nobody to slap them down. They just all sit in the same place, and because they're all saying the same thing, it almost becomes reinforced. And I see that as being behind a lot of this kind of damaging progression, and I see it getting worse. And we hear a lot about the algorithm that is almost like it's pushing certain content at people. So if you go around and say, we hate homosexuals, or we hate foreigners, it's like the algorithm's going, this person is engaging with stuff that
let's show them more.
Clearly they will, and it's almost like it's when you give a computer the brief, you need to try and find a way of making these people stay on our platform for as long as possible, clicking around and scrolling through our content, because they'll see more and more adverts. The end result of this is that it starts feeding them some very unpleasant content, because it's worked out that that's what they've been looking at. So if we give them more, and it's kind of how conspiracy theories get ground, because people just keep getting fed more and more and more of the same, and they don't hear the opposing views. There's no debate anymore.
No, I suppose this is why there's that wonderful nickname. It's called anti-social media, because social media in some ways has been great because it's brought a lot of people closer and together. You can share things, you can talk to people on the other side of the world. But when you've got, as you say, when the algorithm works against you without you knowing it's working against you, or it can be the worst thing in the world, social media, because if anything, it drives people apart. It can actually make you more isolated. If you're an introvert, you can become even more of an introvert, and you don't even realize it. And we were even saying, just before we started recording the podcast, the problem with social media is, you went through bullying at school. I went through bullying at school. Once you left school, you got off the bus, you went home. That was it. It was all done and dusted. Whereas these days, you can get bullied, on Instagram, Facebook, websites, text messages, and
it's 24/7.
Yeah,
it never lets up. And I do feel very sorry for younger people today who've only ever known this world of Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all of this, being on social media at all times. Because like you say, there is no respite. Growing up as a child of the 80s and 90s, there was none of that. Yeah, I got mercilessly bullied at school, but as soon as you got off the coach home, that it stopped. There was no more until you got back to school. And at the weekend, you go home on the Friday, and you were free and clear until Monday. So you got respite, and it kind of got us through. But now, I guess these people, if you're being bullied, there's no let up. and it just goes on and on and on. And then you get the echo chamber effect. Young people are very impressionable. So if there's a bunch of people, I guess, in a class who are having a go at somebody, then the tendency of young people, I guess, is to pile in. This is fun. Let's join in. We'll be hang with the cool kids and bully the kids which don't fit in. And it must be incredibly difficult.
Oh, it must be. I mean, thinking back to to my childhood, I mean, I suffered severe bullying because, I mean, I only learnt several years ago that I'm dyslexic. I also learnt that I'm Asperger's, or I've got a form of Asperger's, which of course now is called autism because apparently the word Asperger's is not the right word to use anymore. And just like you, like I was always growing up thinking, well, what's wrong with me, and why don't I fit in, and why don't people like me? And I could not imagine going through that 24/7 in this day and age compared to how it was with me. Growing up in my school days as well, because as you say, you get off the bus and it stops. Like the mental trauma is still there, but it physically and verbally stops until the next day. And having gone through all this yourself at school, and I'm assuming obviously through the advent of the internet as well, how has it affected your daily life as far as what you do with your career, what you do with your friendships, your relationships, your family life? How has long-term bullying affected elements of your life?
I think that it in some respects, and I don't really want to give credence to benefits of being bullied, but if I feel sometimes like it drove me on. It made me think. I wanted to be able to turn to the people who were taunting me, who were putting me down, and going, "Well, fuck you! Look what I've achieved." And I don't know whether I would have done that without the bullying. I'd like to think I would have anyway. Maybe that's my personality. But I did feel like it drove me on. I wanted to succeed, to be able to show these people that they were wrong about me. But it made it difficult for me to trust people. I think there's also an element of from the autistic side. It's very difficult for me to work out, are people taking the piss out of me, or are they sincere? Sarcasm often goes over my head because in my brain I hear the words and take them literally. And the number of times my partner will tell a joke and I just don't laugh. And it's not that I have no sense of humor. It's just that the subtleties of it. My brain is going, well, this is what those words rigidly mean. Is there some kind of hidden meaning? Because I can't find it. There's an element of me that's become over time less and less trusting. It's like I've been burnt so many times by people who've stabbed me in the back, who have bullying feels like quite a strong word, but you know what I mean. It's like they've over the course of my life, they've taken advantage, or they've treated me as the butt monkey of proceedings. And I think that as well, it's made it harder and harder for me to, have social interactions with people because, it's just, I guess I've learned over time that it's easier if I just have less and less involvement socially with people. Because then I don't have to deal with all these problems. But then there's also an element of, I think you reach an age where, people are attacking you over something and, the inner 16-year-old is sort of withering away and going, I remember this. This is school all over again. And then there's like a tap on the shoulder from the higher brain functions that go, you're 45. You don't have to take this shit from people. And you kind of then mount a fight back. And I found I got admonished for something. Somebody got completely the wrong end of the stick, and they marched up to me at a model rail show, and they were accusing me of spreading fake rumours, blah, blah, blah. And this, for this one little moment, it's like I'm back at school again, being bullied, and then the little voice goes, "You're 45. You don't have to take this shit from anybody." And I fought back, but every time it happens, there's that sudden horrible flashback to being young again, of being bullied.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because the emotional scarring, if I can sort of refer to it that way, I find the same thing when anything happens. If somebody says something to you, or if they attack you or bully you in some particular way, your emotional memory goes straight back to a similar time when you were young. Not so much a particular moment, but the feelings associated with that when you were younger.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And what I find with myself being Asperger's, autistic, whatever you want to define it as, I tend to find that I don't hold grudges, but at the same time, I find that I will always look at that person and the trust has either gone, depending on how severe the bullying was, or it's severely diminished. And I'll without even consciously wanting to, I'll keep replaying the bullying conversation over in my head, and I'll start to replace it with what I wish I could say to them if I stood up to them. But there's always that thing of, well, fuck you because I hate you and you made me feel this way. And I think that's just a condition of having Asperger's and so forth. It makes you, it's like delayed confidence. Like, this is the response I wish I could have given you. But
it's like, it's like you come up in your mind with the thing that you feel you should have said about half an hour after the conversation happened.
Yeah, to stand the ground. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, oh damn it, that had been the most withering comment I could have leveled, and I would have won the internet. And it's always half an hour too late. And it's like you say, it's like that moment then starts to live rent free in your head, and it becomes one of a cluster of memories that they're almost like the demons stabbing you in the back. It's like, do you remember the film Ghost? And there's that bit where the things from the underworld are like sort of stabbing on his back and like pulling him back. And sometimes I feel that there's like this whole collection of moments that are living rent free in my head, my personal demons, and they're always conversations where I was bullied, where there was confrontation is always a theme in a lot of them, and always this feeling that why did I handle it that way? Why didn't I do things better? And even now, there are moments from my childhood which occasionally my brain will serve up to me and go, "Thought you were having a good day? Here you go, dwell on this." And they just kind of, it's like if you find a stagnant pond and you stir it with a big stick and things float back to the top.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that.
All the dead bodies come back up.
Yeah, and it's all the things that, it's almost like a mental shame. Why did that happen? Why didn't I handle that better? And they're always there to kind of try and bring you back down.
It's basically, it's almost like a form of PTSD in some ways, isn't it? Where it's basically like, as adults, one of the things I've really learned and realized over my life is I don't think you truly ever get over anything. You just learn to deal with it, whether that be bullying or the loss of a loved one or a relationship breakdown or something devastating. I think that you just learn to deal with it, and that's what adults do. It's not so much that you really do get over it, but in what you were just saying then, and I've definitely had those moments myself, this memory will come back, and it's either to torment you or just to test you, to go, well, let's see how far you've come. Are you going to fall apart, or are you going to look at it and go, well, that's not me anymore, or I've dealt with that? Would you sort of see that in the same way?
Possibly. I don't know. I think maybe my brain just doesn't like me. But I'm reminded a little bit of, I think it was some of the Roman emperors used to have somebody whose job it was to walk behind them and just whisper in their ear, "Don't forget that you too are mortal." And it's almost like it's the part of the brain that just, it's like, you're getting a bit too big for your boots. We'll serve this up just to bring you back down to earth. But, I think as well, I don't think my brain likes me. And that's the depression talking. But it's and it's one of the things I guess that people, the bullies, would never realize that actually the biggest and harshest critic that I have is myself, because I hate myself as much as they hate me. And we can laugh and joke about it, but as somebody who has so this is where it gets difficult, because there are things that I'm now talking about with you which I've never really talked to about anybody to anybody. There's now the little the rendition of my mother sat disapprovingly on my shoulder, going, "Oh, why are you telling people that?" Because even they don't know. But multiple suicide attempts. I'm not proud of it. I like to think that I've reached a point in my life where I've made peace with enough of the demons that I don't feel pushed to that anymore. It's a bit like alcoholics say that you're never cured. You just you keep counting the days since you last had a drink. And anybody who's become so down that they've contemplated or tried suicide will know that you'll never, that you don't suddenly go, now I'm happy, la 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 la, isn't everything great, and then just never ever look back and think about it again. It's just you kind of you learn to make your way in the world in a way that is satisfactory for your demons.
So you learn to look at a bus as a mode of transport rather than something that can kill you.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm making light of a dark situation there, obviously. I totally understand where you're coming from. But I think one of the things that I find, just quickly getting back to the bullying, leading into what we're talking about now, I think that what bullies don't realize is that whilst people don't think about you very much, they think about you enough to be able to put you down all the time. And in my life, I have definitely found that all of my insecurities, my demons, my crises and so forth of my mind and everything like that, because just like you, I've got low self-esteem. I've hated myself and for years. But what I'm very consciously aware of is that the voices that are in my head, whilst they're my thoughts and feelings and voices of myself, they have been learned from physical bullies in my life who are no longer in my life, but they had such a heavy impact and imprint on my life that their thoughts and attitude have now become my own. Now, I've never been pushed to the brink of going, well, I want to end everything. And I can never understand fully what could bring somebody to that particular level, because we all do go through our own things. But it must be very, very hard. And it's just horrible how these bullies that do exist, who I honestly believe they do think about us more than, because people go, oh, people don't think about you. Well, yes, they do, because bullies will find a target. And whilst they're not thinking about you all the time, whenever they see you or hear about you, they want to make things bad for you. Narcissists are exactly the same. I've experienced them, and they don't realize just how bad it can lead somebody on. So to hear that you've also had experiences that have driven you literally almost to the edge, I mean, that's horrible. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah, and I'm pleased to say that it's probably a good 15 years past that point of my life. So I've got a formula that does seem to work, but it goes back to I guess what recovering alcoholics would also sympathise with, that it's always there. It's always something that follows you around. You're never cured. You just you have a method of dealing with that, so it doesn't dominate your life anymore. And I feel almost like the depression and previous suicide attempts are like that. They're a part of my makeup, and definitely things for me. I felt that bad that was how I acted to the situation. But I've learned to move on from that, and to find ways of getting myself through every day that doesn't lead me back to those dark places.
What are some of those techniques been for you? I mean, I know talking, for example, with Pete Waterman, we had a conversation almost this time last year. And he told me that when he went through a dark patch in his life, he turned to modeling. And I mean, you know him through modeling. I know him through modeling.
Yeah.
And his whole message to me was, because you're refocusing your mind, it doesn't take away the pain, doesn't take away the grief or the depression, but it does temporarily refocus your mind to, at least for an hour or so that particular day, get through a part of that day. So what's the recovery process been like for you? What have you done in your life to aid through these dark times?
I think I'd agree with what Pete said there. I mean, definitely railway modelling is something, it's almost like escapism. It's that respite from what's ailing you, in the same ways that when we were kids, you get off the bus from school and you have that respite at home before the following day. So railway modelling is definitely something that's up there. I think anything creative. You know, I wrote a lot of books, and I guess writing books does give you the ability to almost try and find a new home for some of the demons that are in your head, by using elements of them as inspiration behind elements of what you write. You can get them out of your head and onto the page, and then they're saved. It's almost like the Book of the Dead. As long as it's shut, everything's kept safe and neatly tucked away inside. And there's a lot of things in works of fiction that I've done. I've written horror, I've written science fiction, I've written fantasy fiction, I've written comedy. I've drawn on some of these inner demons to get them out of my head, to stop them living rent-free in there and getting me down. And I found that very useful. And, especially with horror, it's almost like by writing down the nightmare, it doesn't seem quite so bad anymore. You've taken its power away. And if you can make a bestseller out of that, then so be it.
Absolutely. Actually, one of my guests on this podcast has been a chap called Stephen Fay, and he's a modeler. He's an amazing modeler, and I've known him for years. But he's also a counsellor, and he really talked about the importance of a creative outlet, whether that be railway modelling or modelling of anything, or painting or writing, drawing, filmmaking, and anything creative that you can put your mind to and refocus your attention. Use the energy that you're feeling from depression or sadness or whatever, but channel that energy into something creative. And whilst I think it acts at the time as as a bandage as such, over time you actually find that, I'm enjoying this hobby, and suddenly that becomes happiness, which you then multiply until it turns into an addiction, like model railways, where we all go, wow, I've got far too much stuff, and how the hell did I even afford this?
Yeah, I'm looking up at a wall full of shelves with like 400 trains on it. But it's if a creative hobby is definitely very, very useful, and in some respects it doesn't really matter what the creative hobby is, as long as it creates escapism for you. I've always been very hands-on. I love doing DIY. And I guess I learned that from my father. I remember growing up, I used to spend a lot of time just sitting around keeping my dad company whilst he was doing stuff around the house. And I learned by osmosis all manner of things, from woodworking, metalworking, gardening, bricklaying, car maintenance. All these things I learned by osmosis. And sometimes I do wonder, I've never plucked up the courage to ask him, but I do wonder whether there's a hereditary element to all of this. And, maybe that's how he coped with whatever ailed him as a child.
Look, it could very well be the case. I mean, I was very similar, actually. My father, he was always amazing at doing things. I mean, I remember growing up in Australia before, well before I moved to the UK. My dad, he built what we call a pergola outside, and he dug all the holes, he poured in all the concrete, he leveled everything out, and he put all the steel supports in there. He ordered the wood, he cut everything, and of course, a year afterwards, we were all walking outside under this pergola, which it's semi-sun, semi-shade, and it's beautiful. And he's got hanging baskets, which Mum had obviously put around there and done a garden bit up, and it's amazing because I saw how he did that, and to his credit, I still don't know how the hell he did it, because I love woodwork, but I'm not the best carpenter in the world. But I'm not the worst. I'm not Tony from Men Behaving Badly. I'm a step above that. But even I never thought to myself, well, I wonder if this is just his creative outlet, or whether it's just a way of channeling energy from stress at work, for example. And it doesn't need to obviously be bullying. It can be, having a stressful job and having things plaguing your mind because of, what the CEO or the boss is writing you for, or financial difficulties. I think that's, I love your analogy about osmosis. I think it's very, very valid.
Yeah. I mean, I remember so many weekends, he'd be doing something like changing the brake discs and pads on a car. And he's from Yorkshire, so his first comment is normally, "How much? Oh, I'm not paying somebody to do that. So I won't pay somebody to do something I can do myself." And he kind of, he was never afraid to try something, and I think that's something I've definitely taken on from him. And it goes back to when I said about one of my personal ethoses is always take a chance, and you won't be sorry for what might have been. And I guess a lot of that I learned from my father, watching him take on tasks, because it's like, well, if a mechanic in a garage can do this, it's not impossible. There must be a way of doing it, and I will figure it out. I think it's a great way to fight some of these personal demons by saying, it's like, screw you, I am going to succeed. And I always say to people with railway modelling, when people say, how do you get the results that you do? I say, well, the only thing that you need is confidence that, that you can succeed. And everything kind of works itself out.
And a willingness to actually give it a go as well. I think a lot of people fall short, because you spoke at the beginning of the podcast about fear. Fear can really hold people back. But if you break through that barrier of fear and just give that thing a little bit of a go, that's where the confidence then develops to keep going.
Yeah, and you've got to let yourself try. Too many times, I think I see people who they're so frightened of failing that it's almost like they convince themselves that if I try this, I will fail. So they don't even try it. And you see so many people, they don't even know how to wire a plug, how to change the oil on their car. Relatively simple tasks. They're like, oh, I won't know how to do that. So they don't even try. They don't even let themselves succeed. When actually, most things in life are just a steady procession of simple steps. The more complicated something is, the more simple steps there are to go through to get it done. But if you let yourself try, you probably be quite impressed at how much you can do. I mean, I taught one of my neighbours how to change the oil on his car, because he had no idea. And one day he came back from work, he parked his car on the road outside our house, and I was underneath my car changing the oil and filter. He wondered, what are you doing? I said, I'm changing the oil. How do you do that? It's like, well, you pull out the drain and the gravity does the rest, and then you put it back in, and then you fill it back up from the top. And it's like, well, show me. And I tried it, and it's like, that is just, it's so simple. And yet, he would have quite happily paid a garage hundreds of pounds to effectively do the same thing. It's like, how do you know how much oil to put in? So, well, you just look it up. There's a figure, and it will say for your car, for your engine, put in this much oil, and you're golden. You know, it's a lot of these things are quite simple. Changing the spark plugs, it's it's simple once you let yourself try. You know, and you know, when you step it up from there, you can try more and more complex things just as a series of simple steps. There's just more steps. And suddenly you find yourself rebuilding an engine, you know, reboring and dingle ball honing the cylinders, fitting rings, changing shell bearings and rebuilding an engine. And before you know it, you're like, oh, this is actually quite simple because you've let yourself have a go. You've had the confidence to think, well, you know, what's the worst that can happen? And actually, that is quite rewarding. And I think that's been through my life. One of the ways that I've coped is by allowing myself to feel rewarded by succeeding at things I can control.
It's interesting. I mean, look, I mean, I've called this podcast Identity Crisis, and as I've always said, identity crisis can mean anything. It could mean, you know, depression or midlife crisis or whatever the case may be. But I think, you know, the world, in my opinion, has gone through and is going through a massive identity crisis. And I think listening to what you just said then about, you know, learning how to change the oil or a spark plug or a brake disc, for example, the world, that was commonplace up until about, you know, 20, 30 years ago, which for people like you and me, it's not all that long ago. And yet these days, there are people who are growing up who their parents are our age. And there's a lot of people who are our age who don't know how to change a spark plug or change the oil or, you know, take a door off the hinges and put new hinges on there or whatever the case may be. And I think as a society around the world, our collective identity crisis is the fact that we are forgetting not how things work, but we are forgetting that you learn from trying, and you don't call up somebody to go, oh, hey, can you come and fix this? And they go, well, yeah, well, that was, you know, a 3-second job and there's a bill for £100. It's the same thing with delivery services these days. You know, I mean, if you're hungry 10 years ago, well, you went to the fridge or you went to the pantry, you got your food and you prepared something. These days, people go to their phone, order something, and half an hour later, it turns up at your front door. And I think the world's identity crisis in the struggle to take away, I suppose, the mundane things of life, it's led to people who don't know how to do anything and are scared of trying. And I love what you just say, just give it a go. That just, you know, let yourself try. And I think that's actually such a simple but wonderful message. Let yourself try.
Yeah. And I think people are their own worst enemies, because they become so convinced that they won't be able to do it, that they don't let themselves try to find out. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go, oh, I'd never be able to change the oil on my car, I'd just make a mess of it, so you don't try, then how would you ever know? And, you know, then that becomes like, I don't know how to make lasagna, I just make a mess of it, so I'll just buy ready-made from the shop because, you know, it's easier that way rather than making a mess and failing. And it's quite sad, really. And I think I've often thought about this. Why is this? That there's almost like as the internet is taken over, and you think the internet, the font of all knowledge, everything is out there. If you don't know how to do something, you just Google it and there's the information. Somebody's done a video on it. Somebody's done a walkthrough. So there's never been more information available, and yet people are doing less for themselves. And is it a product of this curated Instagram life that people lead? And it was explained to me that, you know, when you browse through things like Facebook and you see what people that you once knew are up to, and it looks like they're living the high life, living the life around. Look at me, isn't everything wonderful? And sometimes that can leave you feeling a little bit inadequate. It's like, oh, look at them, they're spending every other week on a Greek island or mountain climbing in the Swiss Alps, or, you know, all these wonderful things. And actually, that is a curated look into their lives. And unfortunately, this is something that social media seems to encourage, that you self-edit your life. You
Yes.
only put up the good stuff. And so you then start to feel inadequate. Because you're like, well, look at all these amazing things my friends are doing, all these wonderful photos. Don't they look amazing in that? And actually, no, they're only showing you what they think makes themselves look better. And I guess at some point, I started to suspect that most people felt like, oh, look at all this great stuff people are doing on social media. I need to find the perfect photo so it looks like I'm not a sad loser by comparison. And in some respects, that's what one of the other byproducts of social media is. We all think that everybody else is having this lovely picture book straight out of the pages of Vogue life, and actually not. But that then feeds into mental health, feeling inadequate, feeling that, I'm a loser because I don't have 6 foreign holidays every year and I don't have a new Maserati Quattroporte on the drive. Actually, neither do they, because if you delve down into it, there's lots of caveats, there's lots of if, buts and maybes. And before you know it, it's like, oh, that was a friend's Maserati that you borrowed to make yourself look good. And it's like, oh, actually, you didn't go to all these places. There was one of them was a work trip, and another one was just you in front of a green screen. When you drill down into it, things are not as they appear.
No, it's really led to what they now call FOMO, isn't it? Fear of missing out.
Yeah, which is bad. It really is bad. To do a handbrake turn back into what kind of brought us together, the world of railway modelling. That kind of created an air where it's almost like there's this mad rush, this land grab for models as they come out, because you're so scared that, like, oh, if I don't order it, I won't get that, and my life will be ruined because I don't own a model of rocket. And it's like, come on, take a step back. But it's true, and it's. I guess humans are hunter-gatherers. That, when you go right back into our DNA, that's what we are evolved to do. Hunter-gathering. We will collect things in case they're useful. That's why we have sheds full of offcuts of bits of wood and
that you'll never use.
Yeah, and it's like, just in case. And it's like that's starting to creep out into other areas of life where actually I don't need to womble my way through model shops and have so many models that I don't even know what I've got, and occasionally accidentally buy the same thing twice because I forgot that I already had it.
Says the person who's looking up at 400 models right now.
Yeah, 400. I have to be good at putting up shelves because
strong
otherwise
shelves by the sounds of things.
Yeah. Cheers, Dad. You taught me well. I think it's it's not just model railways. You see so many adverts. It's like, come on, buy this, motherfucker. You know you want it. Come on, buy it now. And it's like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's like, please rush me my portable walrus cleaning kit, big enough to tackle any waterbound mammal. And before you know it, you're buying shit that you don't even know that you wanted, but it looked good in the advert. And, it's almost, again, another... there's a theme developing here. It's like the internet is the source of all our ills. But, it's...
Yeah, well, look, as you said to me privately before we started recording, if one of these days somebody has to write a history book on the way life changed, literally from the advent of the internet and everything that's happened in between, whether that be YouTube and big world events such as terrorism and other bits and pieces, it has led us to this particular moment. And when as you're saying, you see things on TV these days. I mean, I love watching. I'll sit down and watch some shows on MyFi, for example. But some of the ads that come on, and you think to yourself, for God's sake, like the way that they sell it to you, and it's just like, it's a fucking duster. That's all it is. It's a fucking duster. It is designed to pick up dust, and they're selling it like it's microfiber technology, and for the biggest, cleanest shine and sheen. It's like, no, it's just a fucking duster. You buy it because you have to pick up the fucking dust. I don't care what it's made of. I don't care if it's a certain brand, and for some reason, and this is completely out of left field, every single TV ad I'm seeing these days is trying to prevent child molestation and people who are pedophiles, because at the very end they always say, come and buy, Flash for your, washing up liquid, keep away from children. I'm like, what kind of a person do you think I am?
Yeah, I regularly go around pouring washing up liquid down the throat of unsuspecting children. Exactly. Here you go, drink up.
I know, it's so stupid. It's, but that's the thing, I think that you probably agree with what I have to say about this. There's that wonderful, wonderful movie from, I think it was the early 2000s, The Truman Show. And,
yeah.
And when you really, really, really stop and think about it, I think society at large has become so much like The Truman Show, where what you see isn't really what you see. People aren't always what they come across as, and you're constantly being sold to keep you in a bubble.
Yeah. And we see that with social media. We talked about the algorithm sending people down a rabbit hole. And it does that because it keeps up engagement. The people stay on the site because all of a sudden they're interacting with things they already think they believe in. So it reinforces their positions. They're like, I like this site because it tells me what is true, sort of thing. And, it's all about showing you the adverts and selling you shit you didn't need. It's like, it's not a mop, it's a way of life. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe it's the cynic in me. I'm trying to think about it. I don't think, it's not like adverts on television were works of Shakespeare in the 1980s. They certainly weren't. But it does feel now, it's become so rammed down people's throats that, it's like your life is defined by the amount of shit you can fit in your house that you buy from these things. Mm-hmm. You see all these things like clothes, and it's you don't want what was big last month. Nah, you don't want to wear that. It'll make you look like a fat slag. You need completely new clothes, new wardrobe. What's that? No, you're wearing yesterday's fashion. Flush it down the toilet. Buy some more. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, it's your entire life is defined by having the latest thing. There are films out there that have kind of touched upon this in parody. There's Terry Gilliam's film, Time Bandits, and there was an element in that with the mother, and it was always she was obsessed by having the latest kitchen or the latest gadgets and stuff. And it feels like that was maybe 20, 30 years ahead of its time, that kind of mentality.
I think a lot of things from, I think, the 70s and 60s were very much ahead of their time because they were creatively thinking in a funny way. And, of course, these days, things are playing out in real life, and that's just a perfect example of it.
Yeah, things are definitely speeded up. The news cycle when I started in journalism, you had several days to lumber up on a story. Now it's like if you don't get it out in the next 5 minutes, it's old news. Yeah. And it feels like things are going faster and faster and faster. And I don't know, can you have too much information maybe? You see some of these 24-hour news feeds. It's almost like they start trying to sensationalize everything because they've got to fill the space. It's like, well, we've 24 hours of news. We need to keep people interested. We need to keep people on the site scrolling through, being enraged, because then they'll see the adverts that go alongside all these news stories.
And how do you keep people engaged? You sell them fear, because they'll talk about it, they'll watch more of it to see what's developing, to see if there's anything to be fearful about or to stop being fearful about. Essentially what we're now talking about, and this is getting very heavy, is societal bullying, from mainstream media. And I know that kind of sounds a little bit heavy and crazy and so forth, but if we're always being sold fear, well, what do bullies make you feel? Fear.
Yeah, fear. And it's, everything now is, I've noticed that the media, it's like everything's an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
There's a climate emergency, there's a financial emergency, there's a credit emergency. And it's when you call everything an emergency, it devalues real emergencies, and you think, a real emergency, that's like shit like 9/11. That was like proper emergency. When all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, somebody's prepared to do that. And, the whole aftermath of that, the numbness of watching something live and going, holy shit, this isn't a Hollywood film. This is real life. And now it's like everything's an emergency. God damn it, everybody, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. There's people gluing themselves to the M25 because they're worried that we're using too much plastic or too much oil, or your car doesn't get high enough fuel mileage. And it's weird. It's like you can't see the wood for the trees. It's like it's difficult to kind of put my finger on, but it feels like society's lost its way. God, this sounds really doom and gloom, doesn't it?
It does. Well, like I said, I think that society is in a huge identity crisis of its own, and I think what you've just been speaking of there is just the surface level glimpse of what we're actually on about.
And it, in a way, it must be like, I guess, to some degree, people in the 1920s and 30s, maybe they felt something similar, having come off the back of the Great War, and how absolutely shocking that would have been to people, whereby every male member of a town were just wiped out in a day on the Somme or Ypres, and to come out of the back of that and have a build-up towards the Second World War, and I guess seeing all the things that were happening with the rise of fascism and such like, and rearmament, Great Depression, and did they know that the Second World War was the inevitable outcome? I'm guessing some people would have been very much aware, like this is shit's going to hit the fan at some point. And I do wonder sometimes, is the time that we're in now, the major socio-political upheaval, is this the prelude to the Third World War? Insofar as, we've seen Russia invading Ukraine, we've seen the rise of violence in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, Iran, North Korea. And then we've had the rise of Trumpism in America, and this very polarized way of looking at politics, where it's like, if you're not with us, you're our enemy. And it's like there's no middle ground anymore. And it feels like the kind of rhetoric that I remember learning about in school that was happening in the 20s and 30s in the run-up to the Second World War.
Yeah, and see, this is why I just love to go back to the 60s. Good music, free sex, and no one gave a shit. I think it would have been a much simpler time to be alive, potentially.
I don't know, they say if you remember the 60s, you weren't really there.
That's it, yeah.
I was like, I have asked my dad, who lived here. It's like, well, what was he really like? It's just like all this stuff that people talk about. I don't know who it was happening to.
I wonder if it's because they can't remember, or it's like, you know what? I'm not telling you my fucking secret, so I'll just tell you that I can't remember. Because
well, it's like saying like living through like the 90s was the best decade ever. The music was great, and it was this we were at the point where technology had arrived, but the internet kind of hadn't. You didn't have all of this social media dystopia and stuff. Like, it was the greatest decade ever. And it's like, well, I lived through it, and it was just normal when you were there.
Yeah.
It didn't. there was nothing about it that went like, enjoy today because this is going to be the greatest day of your life. It was never like that. And I guess for most people in the 60s, it wasn't like that. You look back with rose-tinted spectacles because you're looking at
you're looking at the highlights.
Yeah, you're looking at the highlight. You're looking at like Flynn and stuff, and going, "Wow, wasn't that great?" And it's like, yeah, but you didn't live like that. You still had an outside crapper, and living in some crappy back-to-back house that was built in 1890. It's like for most people, it wasn't like that.
No, that's right.
And it's kind of like the social media thing where it's an edited highlight where you look at what your friends are up to and you think, oh God, they've got such amazing lives. I feel so inadequate. But actually, no, it's not like that. They're not going to sit there and every day go, my life is shit. I got up today and I fell off and I tripped over the cat and I got a bill in the post I wasn't expecting, and then I went to work and it was another crap. People don't post about that. You don't hear about the bad stuff, and it creates a very warped perception because you yourself, all of the day in, day out, the rigmarole, the getting up feeling crap, running out of toothpaste, spilling a tin of beans on the kitchen floor, all of that stuff. You experienced it. You know that happened because you experienced it. But that's happening to everybody else. It's just they don't post about it because it isn't cool to put that on Instagram. So you end up in this situation where you feel like your life is like one big loser fest, and actually it isn't.
Yeah.
Because you're comparing it to a completely edited and curated version of other people's lives, and it's one of the great ills of social media, I guess, because of that.
It is, as we said, it's basically just the creation of FOMO. So I'll tell you what, this is another something we could speak for hours on this.
We have strayed around, haven't we?
We have, yeah, definitely. But I tell you, moving forward and also sort of wrapping the interview up. You've done all these things in your life. Journalism, in front of the camera, behind the camera. You've been an author. You're a YouTuber. You're doing your own modeling. You've gone through a lot of darkness in your life, like I'm sure a lot of people have. What does the future outlook for you now look like? What is the next steps, and how do you see your future from this point onwards, moving forward?
I'd like to hope that I can keep going with my hobby being my job. If I could make a full-time job out of the model railway stuff and the YouTube stuff, I'd be quite happy with that. Whether I can or not, I don't know. I think things move so quickly in this new internet age that being big on YouTube now is not necessarily going to be the hot thing in a year, 5 year, 10-year time. But I would love to be able to do more within the model railway world, but also film and TV. I've always proudly proclaimed to people, it's like I've never had a proper job, and I'm quite proud of that. And I'd like to think that can continue. I'm not as young as I used to be, which is always a bit of a downer when you wake up in the morning and you're in absolute agony because you slept funny. That never happened to me when I was a teenager. You could, as a teenager, you'd fall out of a tree and bounce. Now it's like I just sleep funny, and I've got a bad back for weeks. But I don't know. I just take each day as it comes.
There was a comedian, American comedian, who he said, why do people say this is a picture of my younger self? Every photograph of you is a picture of your younger self. Yeah,
including the one you just took.
Exactly.
It's already second. We could get into a whole topic of things people say that wind up like when people say this is literally it, and it's like stop using that word like that. But yeah, I feel like I'm in a much happier place. I look back at how much the younger me suffered, and I'm really glad that I've come out the other side. Through my life, I've known a lot of people who didn't come out the other side. And unfortunately, it's one of the side effects of being transgender is that you meet a lot of people along the way who don't survive the journey. And you sometimes do reflect on it and think, well, I came out of this alive. I managed to sort out the fundamental problem in my life. But I know a lot of people, I got to know a lot of good people who didn't survive the journey. And, I look back at all those times where I nearly didn't survive the journey. And, am I thankful for that? Yeah, I think, at the time, things felt so bad and so hopeless that the younger me thought that was the solution to it all. But now I look back and I think, I'm glad I was crap at that, because actually, I've gone on to do some amazing things in my life. I've been involved with quite a few different film and TV projects that have just been incredible to have been a part on, and I'm so glad I got that opportunity to do that. And the future, at least in part, does look rosy, because I've got all my shit squared away, and I'm doing a job that I enjoy because I had the confidence to take the opportunities when they came along and let myself try and succeed. I've seen too many people go, well, I got offered the chance to do X, Y, and Z, but I turned it down because I would have just embarrassed myself. And it's like, but you're going through your life constantly beating yourself up about what could have been. And it's like, at least I know that when those opportunities came up, that I just said yes. And it's like, I worked out the details later, because then I knew that I gave everything my all. I mean, one of the biggest things for me, I guess, was the first time I appeared in front of the camera. I was involved with the development on what became Biggest Little Railway. And with that, they said at the end of it, we went through all the process. They were spitballing all the different ideas, and they said, okay, well, we're going to pitch this show. If it doesn't go anywhere, you won't hear anything more, because we'll all go our separate ways and work on something else. And then come the January, I got a phone call saying, we got commissioned and we'd like you to be part of the people on screen doing this. And yeah, I was scared. The idea of being on TV in front of the camera was mortifying, but I just went, yes. And I thought, I'll work out the details later. And I'm so glad I did. Because if I hadn't, I think I would have spent a lifetime thinking, it looks like those guys had so much fun doing that. And I had the opportunity and I turned it down.
There'd always be that what if.
Yeah. And it takes us right back. Always take a chance, and you won't be sorry for what might have been. It doesn't mean that you'll succeed, that you won't have those demons nagging at you going, you had a chance to do something amazing and you said no because you didn't have the confidence in yourself. And it's like that will just live rent free in your head for the rest of your life if you don't have a go. And the honest truth is that looking back, we were eaten alive by midges. There were people practically having nervous breakdowns because of the stresses of filming that. It was just the most horrific film shoot you could imagine.
But what a story. What a story. Yeah.
And that's all people see. And to bring us back full circle on the curated social media outlook, when you look at somebody's Instagram and it's all the amazing photos, the sunny holidays, everything is perfect. And actually, with Biggest Little Railway, you look at the what was transmitted, and everything is perfect, and it makes it look like we had this amazing, fun-packed time. And what it doesn't show you is the waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning because it was the coldest night that Scotland had known for so long. The constant rain, being constantly wet, cold, miserable, eaten alive by midges, absolutely atrocious catering. But all of that is forgotten because all people see is that wonderful TV series where it all looks like we had a great time. And I'm glad that I was part of that, because if I hadn't been, I'd look at the curated version and go, oh, it looks like they had an amazing time, and I turned it down.
Yeah.
So I don't have that demon on my shoulder going, you could have had the chance and you blew it.
Look, I think, as you said, it all comes down to let yourself try. And I think that by the sounds of it, you've done a lot in your life, which is definitely, you've given yourself permission to try. You've got some great experiences and some great stories. And I'd also just like to thank you for sharing your story with the world through this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely welcome. Thank you so much for having me on. And
thank you for listening to this episode. And remember, it's only an identity crisis if you choose to make it one. It's okay to not be okay. So speak up and talk to someone, or be the one that someone can turn to in their time of need. Don't forget to follow this podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show, send me an email at jnewtzcomedy@gmail.com. I'm JNewtz, and I'll see you next time.